Shaun's back. But there's a new arrival in town.
Lula.
Who's a little alien. She's about to discover that our world is pretty sweet. But she's far from home and in big trouble. To help her get back, they'll need to outsmart the bad guys. Be prepared. Stay focused. And stick to the plan. Let the creators of Chicken Run take you on an adventure that's out of this world. Get ready for a close encounter of the furred kind. Farmageddon, a Shaun the Sheep movie.
Hi there, hello. I'm Peter Lord. I'm one of the co-founders of Aardman. But much more importantly, I'm joined today by the key team who helped to make Farmageddon. And I'm joined by Phelan and Becher, who co-directed, and by Paul Kewley, the producer. So Paul, I'm going to ask you the first question. Farmageddon was a sequel to a hugely successful film. How did that process work out for you?
Well, yeah, the first film, took us probably 4 years to make and lots of thinking, as you know, Pete. We were really pleased with the results of it. And we came out at the other end kind of saying we had lots of ideas, and really had to think about those ideas and kind of scrutinize them. But one of them that we talked a lot about within the first film was actually about making a sci-fi film. Aardman had never done a sci-fi, and Richard Starzak in particular, who kind of created the series from Nick's characters, started talking about sci-fi. So that was our starting point. And then we got locked in a room, myself, Richard, a writer called John Brown, who worked with us very closely, and various other members of the team came in and out, and eventually let us out when we had an idea that eventually became the film we see now.
And you had an idea, by the way, with the most fantastic title. Where did that come from?
Farmageddon, as is often the case when Nick Park sits in a room with you, he comes out with little gems, and Farmageddon was actually his. We were talking about aliens invading the farm, and Nick said in his frustrating fashion, where you're like, why didn't I think of that? He said, why don't we call it Farmageddon? And it stuck immediately. We all loved it.
Yeah. And so for Rich, I'll turn to you as one of the directors. The fact that it was from the very outset a sci-fi film, that must have offered you all kinds of opportunities.
I think it was fantastic that we made it a sci-fi film. We're such huge fans of science fiction at Aardman, so we're able to bring all the sort of stories and influences that we've grown up with, and then also just to sort of create a huge scale, so we could start quite small on Shaun's farm and then just sort of get bigger and bigger with sort of secret underground bases and going into outer space and visiting alien worlds. Sort of, the challenge was making it bigger, but not making it too big that it became unwieldy.
Yeah. And let's bring in your co-director, Becher, now. So, now, the very fact you are co-directors is interesting. It's quite common in animation. It's not particularly common in live action. So how did you work that out between you?
Well, I guess I come from an animation background predominantly, so I've worked at Aardman on features as an animator and as a sort of development animator. and Rich has a story background. So actually we fit together quite well in that way. And so when we both became directors on this project, we sat down and discussed the story most of all, and then figured out how we might divide it up on the floor. And essentially we took our whole film. It was really important to us that we understood what the other half was doing, but we took our whole film and broke it into those sort of sequences that we could then direct independently. And then at the start and the end of every single day, we'd come together, we'd look at everything in edit, and we'd discuss and debate.
And we've talked about science fiction, Rich. What sort of, how did you use it? How did you play with it in terms of storytelling, in terms of cinematography, in terms of references? Back to you, Rich.
In terms of cinematography, we shot in a different aspect ratio, so it's a much wider sort of broad sense, and light became really important to create atmosphere and mood, and so we really sort of worked in sort of creating this sort of science fiction is great because there's a sort of element of scariness to it. So we played it at the start where you don't know who Lula is and what she is, and then slowly, as Shaun meets her, the sort of the lighting changes, and she's very luminous and bright herself, and so that becomes a sort of another element to the story. And then her planet and her spaceship has a sort of underwater bright feel to it, which we sort of exploited in contrast to the sort of the villains of the film, which is sort of very cold light. And then because it's a sort of comedy and a parody of sci-fi, we just sort of listed all our favorite sort of stories and films that we love, and then how we could sort of spoof and make fun of them in a sort of like loving way throughout. H.G. Wells and Stanley Kubrick and Paul Verhoeven and Robert Zemeckis, Steven Spielberg, they're everywhere.
Absolutely. Reference the best, absolutely. Yeah. And so, Paul, let's go back to you. Back to this decision to make a sequel at all. So, what do you think was what was profoundly different in this movie from the previous Shaun the Sheep movie?
The first film was very, for want of a better word, it was a low concept idea. What we did was we explored the kind of family of creatures, and, the farmer that live on the farm, and we took them outside their comfort zone, and it was hard to figure out, but it meant that we had a very kind of grounded place to come from. Then when we started talking about a sequel, everybody wanted bigger and better and funnier and more expansive. And we wanted to find something to throw our characters into that felt unexpected. And so try to find a genre, is always helpful with these things. And of course, Aardman comes from that place. And science fiction felt like it had that scope, and it's linked, obviously, inextricably to farms. A lot of kind of sci-fi films are based on farms in the Midwest, as we know. So we felt that all of that kind of fitted together in a really nice way. So that was the good news. Then we had to figure out, right, we have these limitations. We have no dialogue. We want to introduce no characters. Yeah. Where do we go from here? So that was when the hard work really started, was figuring all of that out.
Yes, absolutely. So Rich, because you were head of story, weren't you, on the first film, on Shaun the Sheep movie. So can you talk a bit about the challenges of not having any dialogue?
It's tricky.
Really?
It's a very pure form of storytelling, so it becomes very much about performance and expression and timing. And so we work incredibly close with our editor, Sim, throughout the whole process. The storyboards, so much as to sort of work right from the beginning. And so we board it and screen it and test it with audiences and keep adding new people so that they can understand, and we can ask them, like, when you follow what's going on. And so it's a very, very iterative process, constantly sort of working it out, and then making sure that it's as entertaining and appealing and exciting as possible. just through action and sound and music alone. It's really wonderful. We studied a lot early silent cinema, so Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin, they're sort of like our sort of guiding stars for a lot of things, and then just making sure the relationships between all the characters are working, and sort of you emotionally connect with what's happening, I think is the key to it all.
Yes, it's amazing, I must say, how clear it is. I see it with absolute awe. It's such a challenge to tell a complicated emotional story like that. Were there any areas, do you remember any particular story points that were a real challenge to convey purely visually?
Yeah, there were quite a few. There's no right or wrong way. That's the thing about making a creative thing and a feature film that has to sustain an audience like that for that amount of time. It was definitely a challenge. So we'd quite often have an idea that evolved over time, and there'd be narrative strands going through that sometimes didn't quite line up. There was definitely a piece around how Lula would find her spaceship in the beginning. She was going to have to take Shaun on a journey to try and locate it, and just trying to do that visually was really complicated, because we didn't want to get into just miming and having Lula sort of act out words in front of Shaun. So, and as Rich said, and Paul and Sid, we spend so long just going over and over those little bumps to try and find the neatest, but also quite often the funniest way to get a solution.
Yeah. The great achievement of this film and of the previous Shaun the Sheep film. What is the amazing thing to me and to viewers is that you take a piece of modelling clay, which is about that big, and somehow manage to put on screen genuine emotion. I mean, what's the secret? Will?
I reckon we'd all have a different answer for that, but what I think is unique is that this is a stop motion feature film, and stop motion in itself is a sort of mystical art form that involves, you communicate as much with the animator before they start animating as you can, and as soon as they're off animating, we have no control over what happens. So it could be a day or it could be 3 weeks. We've started our actor, and 3 weeks later we see what they've done. So it really is the most sort of amazing and organic thing to witness.
Yeah. I'm gonna throw this open to all of you because I don't know the answer myself. I'm interested to know what you found in the story that was, as it were, personal to you. What was there in the stories, perhaps Shaun's, maybe Lula's, that was actually personal to you guys?
For me, the relationship with Shaun and Lula is the heart of the story, and the idea of meeting people that become your best friends is sort of really, you can remember the moment you met your best friend growing up, and sort of like it becomes sort of like milestone in your life, and I think that's sort of really important. And then like as you grow older and sort of like you lose contact with friends, there's this sort of like the part when Lula goes home, I find it's really quite heartbreaking. Because it's a real sort of like growing up moment where you don't take all your friends with you all the time, but like they stay with you here, which I think is really sort of like resonates with me, the sort of journey that Shaun and Lula go on. I think that's the big thing for me, is to sort of making friends and sort of like going on adventures with them.
Yeah. Well, okay, so we've been talking a little bit about Lula. The name has been mentioned. And Lula, of course, is the big surprise of the film, I think. The spectacular new character. Paul, do you want to talk about where she came from?
Yeah, Lula was quite a challenge, actually, as a character to figure out, because we knew very early on we wanted to bring in a character of this type, and there were various challenges around her age and her identity, which hopefully people will have seen this film before this talk. So, but I'll try not to give too much away.
Yeah.
But she, in terms of kind of design language and trying to figure out what she looked like and how she acted, we went around in circles a lot. I think it's fair to say, trying to figure that out. And actually, something that Rich and Will were really instrumental in was in figuring out what she looked like. Making her the character she became, was really surprising and kind of wonderful to me, and kind of speaks, as Will said, to the process of stop frame, that you kind of imagine a character and it evolves in, often in a fantastic way. And the colour and the way Lula acts and her vocal performance from Amalia, just make a fantastic character that springs out of the screen, I think.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And to work with Will, to work with that voice and those scenes, was she fun to work with?
She really was, yeah. And I think we all of us making the film, we felt like we were meeting her as well, a bit like Shaun is. We had this character who's new to the world, and Shaun is so iconic and everyone knows him so well. We were all a bit nervous about how they would actually fit together. And the first test screening we did, which was still animatic form, you could sense the audience, the way they got to know her when she first appeared in the barn. It was a really magical moment for us all. We sort of felt like a relief that actually we were introducing someone who fits in quite well. But she's got that great mixture of sort of lovable but completely unpredictable. And at any point she could turn into a crazy sort of sugar-fueled nightmare, which, as Rich was saying, we're thinking about family a lot, and we're thinking about friendships when we're making it, but also thinking about what it's like to have children who don't always do what you want them to do. So Lula offered that brilliant sort of out of control element to it.
And of course, okay, spoiler alert, but the fact that she is a child isn't recognised for a long time, is it?
No, that's right. And actually, that was probably the biggest challenge we had through the development of the story. Is that was one of the things we wanted to bake into the story, and it was difficult to sell. It was very difficult to sell that idea in animatic form and to make everybody believe that that was going to work. So there was a certain amount of kind of, fingers crossed, kind of, we were hoping that when we first tested the film that people wouldn't get it straight away. And as Will said, actually, the moment when Shaun and Lula get together, I think they just realised that people weren't seeing that. They were seeing an alien, they weren't seeing a child, which was really edifying and fantastic and a big relief to me.
And for those that haven't seen the movie yet, we do visit briefly her world, don't we, Rich?
We do, yeah. So it was great fun to design a sort of like kaleidoscopic planet, sort of with very psychedelic colours. I wish we could have spent longer on there, but time's always against us making these things.
And she has a very, very cool spaceship as well.
Yeah, she has a fantastic spaceship. Small on set, but big on screen. But it's great. It's a great mix of sort of like luminous colours and hundreds of LEDs when it was built, and there's holograms and all sorts. It was really sort of good fun to build and to design.
Will mentioned, Will mentioned that Lula has a kind of a major sugar rush at one time. And there is, in films like this, there are often like spectacular set pieces. And I think that in the supermarket, you have an absolute classic set piece. Will, would you like to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, from a production point of view, it's probably one of the most ambitious sequences we filmed. It took pretty much the whole production, so almost a year to shoot. So we had 2 animators working on it all the way through. And it is just it's a sort of a moment of pure fun for the kids watching, because Lula embarks on a supermarket. She's never seen Earth food before. So she tries everything in there, eventually finding the sweet aisle, which is where it all kicks off. And we just had a lot of fun working on all the possible things she could do when she was trying sweets for the first time. It was just, it was a lot of fun.
A lot of fun to storyboard, a lot of fun to shoot, I imagine. You also had, as well as the supermarket scene, which I remember well, you also had perhaps the biggest set I've ever seen in there as well, Paul.
Yeah, the underground base. I think we always make these claims, obviously, when we make these films. But I think it was the biggest interior set we've ever made at Aardman. And when it first came together, it was quite extraordinary to see both the level of detail, but also just the ambition that was seen within it. And it is testament to the crew, and that they can pull these things off. Because we sit in a room, idly come up with these ideas and say, what if? And then they make it 10 times better than we expected. So, yeah, it's an extraordinary thing. And the massive spaceship looks tiny in it. So it tells you how big it was.
Yeah, yeah. And as I remember, the animators needed to climb onto the set every frame.
Times, weren't there? Well, there were 40 odd characters in the shots. It was incredibly difficult for the animators to do.
Yeah, we had to, it's the thing about stop motion is that you're physically walking around these real sets, miniature sets, and it's just incredible to walk into one room and be in a supermarket aisle, a miniature one, and then next door we walk in and there's just this expansive underground sort of Bond style layer, which makes it really fun for me and Rich, because we could be in 10 different film locations in a day.
Yes, that's what people that don't know the business don't understand, that the fact that you as directors are directing on, as you say, maybe you're directing 10 sets all the same day. That's quite mind-boggling, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. So to walk from, like Will said, to an underground base to supermarket, and then I had a set of like the farmer's theme park, which was so big it was lying on its side, otherwise it would go through the roof. And so the amount of the crew is just so amazing, how they're sort of able to sort of build and sort of create these sort of wonderful small worlds, and then just imbued with so much sort of joy and fun and life is a real testament to them.
Joy and fun and life, absolutely. And yet you've also got a villain, of course. These films often have a villain. What do you think about Agent Red? Will?
Well, Agent Red was obviously a threat that is very sort of typical of a sci-fi film. We've got our alien, and then we have to have something that's hunting that alien. We wanted to keep her quite sort of stark. There was a little element of Mrs. Tweedy about her in terms of design. We wanted to hark back to that scary character that doesn't say too much, but that has a lot going on inside. And she was quite a challenge from a sort of animation point of view because of that. Shaun and Lula don't have many things they can do to emote, but we get a lot from them. But with Agent Red, because we wanted to keep this slightly sort of Terminator-esque thing, it was really hard to get across what was going on inside her head, and that's where obviously the framing and the storyboarding, but also the sound design really helped us.
Because although she's really bad, because she's the villain, so she should be bad, but you've also actually ultimately made her quite sympathetic, haven't you?
That's one of those other things that we worked a lot on how we were going to make this backstory come across. I'll pass over to you, Paul.
For me. Oh, thank you. Yeah, in the first film we had a villain who was an out-and-out villain. He doesn't have, he hadn't all redeeming features, and actually he has a guest role in this film if you go looking for him. But Trump, was that kind of archetype. But with Agent Red, we wanted to play with something else. Actually, we always had this idea that we wanted Agent Red to be a character who thinks that aliens are bad, and ultimately to find out, the truth about them. And we planted a backstory with her about her childhood, which again took quite a lot of working out. It looks really simple in the execution, but actually it only came together very late on. And Rich and Will did a really, fantastic job of figuring out how visually to tell that backstory, because it's quite a complicated idea that she'd seen these aliens previously.
Again, it's one of those complicated ideas which is difficult to show visually, but I think you've done a brilliant job in turning her around so that actually we end up, sympathizing with her at the end of the film, which is lovely. It gives you a great warm feeling as you reach the end of the movie. And a whole other question now. Let's talk a bit about the music, because that's very important, especially as you haven't got any dialogue. So, Paul, do you want to talk about the choice of of music and where songs came in?
Yeah, absolutely. So music for this film was a challenge, because in the first film, music was kind of part of the mood and actually played a crucial story element. In this, one of the questions very early on was, how does the soundtrack work? What are we listening to? Over and above Tom Howe's amazing score, we also knew that we wanted to have some songs and some music that would help us tell the story. And so we spent an awful long time actually trying to figure that out. And we brought in a guy called Mike Smith, who is a Bristol native and is part of the Gorillaz team. He's their musical director. And Michelle DeVries, who's a music supervisor. And the two of them started to throw lots and lots of ideas into the bottom, getting lots of demos actually for areas of the film that we knew we wanted stories in. And we were using temp tracks, as you always do in bits of the film, and then editing them in. So certainly the editor and I would often spend the days throwing these songs into the film for Rich and Will to then come and sit and listen to, and either go, "Oh my God, what have you done?" or "That's interesting." And we evolved the music from there, and we ended up with some amazing artists doing music for us again in this film. Kylie Minogue being one of them, and Kylie we actually put together with the vaccines, which was an idea that Michelle and Mike came up with. Initially, it was a little crazy, but I think the final song is fantastic. We've got Georgia Smith on there. We've got a whole range of fantastic artists, a lot of whom I never would have expected would get involved in a film like this.
I think we've talked a little bit about Amalia, who did the voice, and she was absolutely great, wasn't she? But you also had long-standing friends of Aardman, friends of Shaun the Sheep, doing Shaun and the Farmer. Talk about those guys.
Yeah, I think we all spent a bit of time in the sound booth capturing those noises, and obviously people that know Shaun know that there isn't any dialogue as such, but what those actors bring to it is incredible, because although they're not making words, they're most certainly giving us a lot to work on and a lot for the animators to react to. So we would spend hours at a time recording lots of just minutely different versions. We always had in our heads what we're after, but again, it's a slightly organic process. So John Sparks, who plays the farmer, he's also the voice of Becher, and he brings so much comedy to it with those, just the way he reacts, those tiny noises that show that Becher's really embarrassed or is quite he's being tickled or something. It's just brilliant to work with them, to have that backdrop.
And poor old Becher, he gets a hard time as usual, doesn't he? He's unfortunately, that's his role in the film. Rich, you dress him up and make him look like a bit of a fool.
I love his costume. No, it was really good fun to make him sort of the farmer's stooge once again, and to design poor Becher, to design a costume that's too small for him. So it wraps around all his sort of like his belly and makes it very unflattering, and his helmet. Yeah, it was great fun. And I think Becher's, when he glues himself to the floor, he's one of those great comic characters. You really relate to like being stuck in the middle between like trying to hang out with your friends and sort of like do your job right. It's great. Yeah. He sort of really, and the fact that he sort of turns good in the end and saves the day is really sort of a wonderful moment for him.
Yes, because that double act between Shaun and Becher, it's quite the heart of the whole Shaun experience, isn't it?
And we had a lot of, we really care as filmmakers that we're not doing anything too harsh to Becher, because he's a really important part of the family. Yeah. So by the end of it, it was lovely to actually bring them back together and make it feel like Shaun and Becher will always have each other.
So Paul, like the first Shaun the Sheep film, this was made with Studio Canal. How was that relationship?
Studio Canal have been fantastic backers actually for both movies. They very early on, before the first film, they were very keen to make it, and they were big supporters all the way through the making of this film as well. And so it was the perfect relationship, you know, in terms of filmmaking and, you know, then in the process of selling the film here in Europe. And then Netflix have been fantastic partners and have done a brilliant job in the US getting the film out there. So it's just great to have partners like that who are willing to support us and bring this to the screen.
The Farmageddon has been nominated for a BAFTA last year, I think, which is rather wonderful. Congratulations, that's fantastic. Have you been delighted? I hope you've been delighted by the reaction to the film.
Yeah, I think we were blown away, to be honest, by the reaction that we got, and it's always fantastic to hear good things about it and people feeling that it works. And I think actually over time, you know, the BAFTAs were in February, and the film has now come out on DVD in the UK. And I've had numerous people, particularly people with kids, who tell me they've watched the film over and over and over again. And I think that's the test for us is does the film last? Will people watch it more than once? And so I'm really genuinely over the moon that they are watching it over and over again.
And I'm sure they'll continue to do so. It's a really lovely film. Congratulations to all three of you. Thank you for joining me, and good luck with whatever's next for all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you both. See you all three. See ya. Bye-bye now.